Well, let's start off then. So a key aim of Living Lakes Canada is to elevate the water stewardship through a community-based water monitoring throughout Canada. And that's particularly focused on the Columbia River system. So for people who aren't familiar with the concept, what is community-based water monitoring and why is it so important?
Yeah, so community-based water monitoring refers to local communities that are actively participating in collecting data on whether it's water quality or water quantity. And it can be led by any diverse group of people. So First Nation governments, Indigenous-led organizations, water stewardship nonprofits like ourselves, even local governments and regional water boards all kind of fall under that umbrella of community-based water monitoring. And the main goal and why it is so important is that it really strengthens water stewardship and it empowers people who are involved in these types of initiatives to protect their freshwater sources and kind of take back a little bit of power. So this is achieved by connecting them to watershed planning and decision-making and stewardship and research. So they kind of get to dip their hands into all those aspects whenever it comes to their watersheds.
And are they picking up water data that is not being picked up by other groups?
Yeah, I think one of the strengths that I've always seen in community-based water monitoring is that it's really a good way to fill some of these data gaps that we see in monitoring protocols that are put forward by the province or federal governments even. So community groups typically are a lot more focused on their smaller systems, whereas obviously provincial governments, federal governments have a much loftier task of looking at all of the watersheds as a whole. So they are really great at plugging some of those data holes and collecting some really valuable information that might not otherwise be collected.
Okay. And water monitoring efforts have been going on in the basin for some time. Now, my understanding is that there were some problems with how that was being conducted and the way that data was being collected and stored or not being collected and stored that led to the decision to build the Columbia Water Basin Hub, which officially went live in 2021, is my understanding. Can you just take me through a bit of that history and a bit of the thinking process that went to the decision that some sort of hub had to be established?
Yeah, so back, I believe it was in 2017, there was a series of meetings that took place that Living Lakes Canada had facilitated with a bunch of hydrologists across the province that basically looked at the Columbia Basin and tried to understand, do we have enough water data to understand, the direction that this watershed is heading, where we're currently at? And the resounding answer was largely no, we don't have the information needed. So two things came out of that meeting. First was actually the decision to create something called the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Framework. And that is a monitoring program that Living Lakes Canada manages, which has seen like almost 140 new hydrometric groundwater lake level stations put up across the Columbia Basin. But another thing that came from that is, where is this data going? Where is there a wholesome log of what's happening and who's monitoring in the Columbia Basin? And there wasn't anything. So that's really where the Columbia Basin Water Hub was born out of, was this idea that there needed to be a centralized repository for water data in the Columbia Basin specifically, because we knew monitoring was happening, but there was no way to track down that data. And what it was is that it was mostly being held on private devices, in some cases even paper, and was really at risk of being lost. And that's a lot of valuable information with pretty long records included in that kind of at-risk data set that was floating around out there. So the Water Hub was, a space to be able to store that centrally and also protect that data to make sure that it wasn't going to be lost.
Okay. And so where was that data being stored before the hub?
Before the hub, it was mostly just on like community stewardship groups, laptops, personal computers, that type of thing. There was no real spot for it. Very little community-based water monitoring data ends up on like provincial databases, typically because a lot of the provincially run databases have some barriers in place that make it difficult for groups to contribute to, whether it's just the quality or grade of data that needs to be achieved by a group. There's some ownership concerns occasionally with open sharing to provincial or government portals. So there was a lot of reasons why that data just wasn't going anywhere. And you kind of had to know who was doing what to reach out to them exactly and be like, hey, can I have this data set type deal? So that was the solution that we are aiming to find basically with the Water Hub.
Okay, and I mean, and the other thing I think is really interesting, I watched a couple of videos by Hub people talking about one really good video, which was talking about just a forum, I think 3 or 4 people who were who from various groups. I was astounded by the breadth of people that are doing water monitoring. I mean, commercial groups, First Nations groups, river users like fishers, kayakers, hunters, gun clubs, land trusts, other groups.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all community groups that are just doing this sort of stakeholders just doing this water monitoring.
Yeah, we have 54 contributors to the Water Hub, and they really vary, whether it is, a community group that's mostly volunteer-led. Invasive species councils even contribute water data, and this is kind of like ancillary data that they're collecting to their broader initiatives that they contribute to the hub. We have some industry partners who are willing to share some of the data that they're collecting as well, especially when it comes to kind of baseline information about the areas that they work and manage. So we really have a very diverse kind of group of stakeholders and contributors that see value in the hub and are putting their data in, which is great.
So you've got this diverse group of people. And they're collecting data, I presume, on different topics, because that's the other thing. Not only are there a lot of groups that are doing community water monitoring, but they're all looking at some of them are looking at specific aspects of the health of the water in the basin,
Mm-hmm.
which was really interesting also. What are some of the, so they're collecting that data, it's on different topics, in different formats. It's stored on the hub as a sort of central point of truth for this data, but also as a way of then sharing it and making it more accessible. What are some of the challenges as a data manager to accommodating all of this in a data portal?
Yeah, lots of challenges would be the answer there. So as you said, we have so many groups that are collecting different sorts of data. When the hub was in development, we knew that data standardization for us was going to be really important because we wanted to make sure that the data that we were ingesting into the hub was usable, machine readable, all those types of things. When it comes to the challenges, I think one of the areas that can be the most difficult is because we're working a lot with community stewardship groups. They don't have a lot of capacity, and they're already working on really tight budgets to kind of work in this data management world. So what we've done as a team is kind of fill this void a little bit for them. So we work with them to help develop their data management plans, and we work with them to help put their data into templates and make sure that everything works out well. So we do a lot of engagement with our users is kind of the short answer there. So we pride ourselves on being one-on-one with our contributors. We make sure that they feel comfortable and that the data upload process is as easy as possible and as straightforward as possible. And CKAN has been really lovely to help us do that because the backend is so intuitive for users, and you don't need to be like a programmer to get your data into the Water Hub, which is really nice. I think some of the other struggles that we sometimes have, we have to work a little bit with some groups so that they can see the value in adding their data to an open data portal, which again, that's where engagement comes in. It's lots of conversations, it's chats about, how your data can have a further reach and impact whenever you upload it to a portal like this, higher chance of being used outside of the confines of what you initially envisioned for your data. So maybe you received a piece of funding for some equipment to do some just straight water temperature monitoring on a creek. But that data can actually go a lot further whenever you upload it to a platform like this. Lots of struggles, but also a lot of inventive problem solving and solutions on our team to make sure that everyone's getting the best experience they can out of the hub.
You talked about that back end process. I'm interested in that because users or stakeholders, whatever you want to call them, they can actually upload their data directly now, can't they?
Yes, yes, they can.
Has that always been the case at the hub, or is that something that you've developed over time, or that was something that was intentionally built into the hub?
It was something that was intentionally built into the hub. And to go into a little bit of Water Hub history, which I always kind of giggle at now. I've been with the Water Hub team now for 3 years, but obviously, as you said, it's been going on since 2021. And even before that, 2017 is when the initial concept was developed. Yeah. And what we initially thought was that the Water Hub could be a bit of like a self-sustained data portal. So we would make sure that users would be able to contribute to the data, and there wouldn't be need for someone like myself to manage the portal. Obviously, we laugh a little bit at this now because we know that even whenever users are able to upload their own data into the Water Hub, there is still need for that kind of oversight and management over a portal. But it was really important that we allow users to have the most control possible over their data. So from the beginning, they've been able to upload their data into the Water Hub, and also they're able to take it down whenever they want as well. So we don't have too many sensitive data sets on the Water Hub, but it was under the belief that if a participant or a contributor to the Water Hub ever changed their mind about how they wanted to share their data or participate in the Water Hub platform, that they have that power over their data. And again, that was one of the barriers that existed in some of those other portals that were available at the time. Once you kind of send your data to the province or to various other portals, it can be really cumbersome to get that data taken down, or in some cases, not possible at all. So again, this was a way that we were able to fulfill a need for communities and remove a barrier to getting their data kind of up there.
Yeah,
it felt good to them.
Yep. Can you take me through a little bit the process of that? Just what? So I'm one of your community water monitors, and I've got some data. How do I? What's the back end process of that?
Yeah, so
and how have you made that as simple as possible? As you say, you're dealing with people with a real diversity of data skills, and I imagine some people that don't have any data skills at all, actually. But, you know.
Yeah. So if we were to be recruiting you, for example, as a contributor, the very first thing that we would do is set up a one-on-one meeting with myself. I would take you through the hub. I would show you some of its functionalities, talk a little bit about the benefits, that type of deal. We'd get you set up with a data sharing agreement. So all of our contributors sign a data sharing agreement that just outlines, you're hosting the data through the Water Hub, but you largely are still the owner of that data. You maintain full control, just defining those a little bit. From there, we would provide you, well, actually two options from there. One, if you were of the mind that you wanted to manage and upload your data on your own, we would do kind of like a quick training session to provide you with all the skills necessary to do that. And then we would send you on your way with a template that we've designed to make sure that the data has been standardized throughout the Water Hub. But if at that stage you decide, you know what, I'm never going to get around to this, I really don't feel comfortable even working with Excel, data is not my strong suit, this feels like a hurdle that I'm not going to overcome, you could at that point just send us the data and we would manage the upload for you. So our team offers basically from a scale of 0% involvement to 100.
Okay.
And all, like, we have some contributors who just every month send us like a raw data file straight from their loggers, and that's it. And we take it, we make sure that their data stays up to date for them. So that's kind of the general process there. As we go through the data, we do kind of like a rudimentary QA/QC of all that data. And we've actually developed data grades for the Water Hub. And what we do now with our contributors is also work with them a little bit to improve the quality of their data. So we may say, hey, like, we've noticed that there's some metadata information missing. Can you provide us with what equipment you used? Or you're really close to achieving the, technical research grade, which is the highest grade of data that we afford, but we need some site photos, or can you provide us a little bit of information on calibration that you might do with your equipment? And suddenly they get to kind of pop up onto that grading scheme. And one of the best things that we've seen about the Columbia Basin Water Hub is that we've seen data across the basin improve because we work with folks to make sure that, they're collecting all the information they need. I think metadata, especially, a lot of people forget the importance of it. But when it comes to reusing that data and seeing that data used in broader models, or for other organizations picking that up and integrating it into their work, it's really important that they have that background information to know, was the equipment appropriate? Were they calibrating? All that kind of information that you need when you're not the one collecting the data. So it's been one of kind of the hidden, unanticipated benefits of the hub is the quality of the water data has gone up.
Okay, and just for my information, what area are we talking about in the Columbia Water Basin Hub? I mean, in the actual water basin, what's the sort of size of the area?
Oh gosh, I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
It's large though, isn't it? It's significant.
That's a trivia question. I'm not sure, but it is like kind of the full Canadian Columbia Basin. If you go on the Water Hub, you'll see like our map search. We have like pretty good spread. We're definitely, I would say, have more data across like the southern portion. But yeah, the whole hub or the whole basin is kind of our main area of focus. And we actually do have some data sets that fall outside of like that hard, those hard boundaries of the basin as well. Mostly because some groups have contacted us. For example, I just was working with a group from Quadra Island, so on the west coast, just off Vancouver Island. And they had some hydrometric data that they wanted to share with us because they weren't able to find anywhere else to share this data. There wasn't any portals in their area that would accept it, but they did want to make it available and viewable to folks, that are on Quadra Island or elsewhere. So we do have some cases where we have data outside of the basin as well that we've offered a home for.
Okay, so large area, different data, different levels of data skill amongst your 54 contributors. That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit more about how you handle the question of different data formats and the challenge of standardization of that data and how the hub does that?
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple of times we do have our templates that we use. So these templates have been really important for us because they allow us to make sure that all of our naming when it comes to the data that we're uploading is standardized. So water temperature data is entered as water underscore temperature in every single data set that we have, so that if someone was to go through, access our data through the API, it is as clean as possible. So naming standardization has been really important. Standardizing the way that we kind of categorize data. So we have tags on our system as well that are heavily standardized because we want to make sure if someone's selecting a tag that says water temperature, or actually a better example would be climate change, for example. If someone's selecting a tag that says climate change, we want to make sure that the data that it's generating is actually climate change data. And this is a good one for an example because typically everyone feels like all their data relates to climate change and water. It's the one they always click every single time. So the idea of data standardization across, not only just like the resources itself, but also the way that we assign tags and things like that has been really important. And it's a lot of work on our end. I think when you have 54 contributors of varying levels, we even offered training and we've provided the resources for folks to upload their data on their own. We still go in there and we see some differences. CKAN has been really great because we've been able to get some tools in place that alert us whenever new data has been uploaded so that we can kind of kick off our process to go through and make sure that things are kind of tackled as soon as possible. It's a lot of work, but I'm a data nerd, so I love data sets.
Okay.
So it feels really rewarding when everything comes out all nice and it's like everything's lined up and it's good.
You just touched on this next question already. Why did you choose CKAN as the sort of technological backbone of the hub? And how does it help with some of the challenges we've discussed already? And you've already touched on some of this, but I'm interested in you going a bit deeper on it.
Yeah, so CKAN was floated around pretty early on in the decision of what platform we were going to go through, and I wasn't with Living Lakes Canada at the time, but it was from my understanding that CKAN kind of checked a lot of the boxes. One, it was an open source platform, which was really desirable. And it was a definite strength, but also something that was really important is that the BC government, as well as the Canadian government, run their databases primarily on CKAN platforms as well. And database integration has been really important for us from the beginning. So integration, interoperability, that type of thing. So we saw choosing CKAN as a strength for development down the road when we potentially hope to get some better integration set up between those databases and ourselves. We also liked how user-friendly it was, intuitive, it was flexible. We were able to design tools that would, like I said, alert us whenever new data has been uploaded, but also that users would be able to upload data themselves and kind of manage their data on their own if they desired. So there were some real strengths there. And we were working kind of closely with a couple of other groups that had built similar portals. So the Skeena Salmon Foundation, or the Skeena Salmon Trust, also had a CKAN portal that we heavily based our own off of. So all of these things were pointing us in the direction that CKAN was likely to be the best fit for us. Okay.
What other tools did you find did you find that were useful in CKAN that have helped you do this quite complicated, very, very diverse work?
Yeah, we really liked the way, just speaking of some basic things, CKAN's way of organizing data. So you have your data sets and then you have your resources was also really great for us. Because typically whenever we start monitoring an area, you don't just have one piece of data or one resource that goes along with that data set. You have images, you have potentially reports that are generated out of the tabular data and things like that. So we really liked that method of organization. The ability to preview the data and some of those kind of out of the box tools a little bit were really great for us to have. In some cases, as I said, we deal with users that have varying levels of technical expertise, to make sure that there was tools that were easy to use on the platform, so that in some ways they might not even need to hit that download button and then have to deal with Excel or proprietary software that they might not have access to, but that they can do a lot of that within the portal was a strength. And even now with the new graphing functionality that we have, that Link Digital built, that's been a really big game changer for getting prettier graphs together and folks just able to hit save on those graphs and kind of take them where they need to go. Also, the map previewers, all those things really just contributed to a toolbox for our users that we were really happy with. And it goes beyond just, being a place to store data. We have some ways that you can play around in the database as well, which has been great for folks.
And of course, I would imagine that a key benefit of CKAN 2 relates to the metadata and standardized and facilitating standardized metadata, which is really core to what you're sort of doing and ensuring it all talks to each other and makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That the way that we're able to standardize the metadata, a definite strength, and the way that it has made it accessible to users. So it's like I said earlier, you don't need to be a programming whiz to get data up there. We were able to set the parameters of those metadata, really let users know what information we're looking for, what we need from them to accompany their data, and they're able to kind of input that in there, and we can kind of force their hand a little bit to make sure they're selecting the right options. Has been great.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And First Nations groups, I think you call them First Nations groups in Canada. Is that correct, or Indigenous groups? Or
Nation governments or Indigenous communities is.
Okay. Your Indigenous communities are very involved in community-based water monitoring in the basin, and they're a key partner of Living Lakes Canada and they work with you on the hub. And I'm just wondering what particular considerations you need to make in terms of working with those groups, data sovereignty, things like that.
Yeah, so when working with First Nation governments or with Indigenous groups, there are definitely some differences in the way that we work with them on the hub and the way that we manage data. So one of the principles that we make sure that we align with is the OCAP principles, which stand for ownership, control, access, and permission. Yeah, so the Water Hub by design fulfills a lot of those. So one, the ownership always remains in the hands of the contributor, in this case, the Indigenous community, the First Nation government. We don't own that data, they own it. They have full control, they're the stewards of that data. They're able to control whether it goes up, whether it goes down, whether it's marked as private, public, anything that they choose to do. We kind of hit that. Access and permissions, they don't need to share all their data with us. They can mark that data as private. There's a few things that are available there. But also whenever it comes to the data sharing agreements, we are able to customize our data sharing agreements to make sure that the language and the way that things are laid out between the Water Hub and First Nation government or Indigenous community group would align well with what they're comfortable with. So there's just some different considerations that we take there. And one of the things that we are looking forward to on the Water Hub is introducing the collaborate function. So being able to, for let's say an Indigenous community has a data set that they have marked private, they don't want the external public to see that, it's just for them and their members within the organization to have viewership over. The collaborate function would allow them to invite on a user-to-user basis someone from outside the organization profile to view the data. So that's another way that we're kind of introducing some flexibility to allow better control whenever it comes to sharing data. And yeah, I think that covers a lot of it. Largely, it's just us respecting, what folks are feeling comfortable to share. And I think when it comes to sharing with Indigenous groups and sharing with First Nation governments, it's such a relationship of trust. So it's been a long process for good reason, and we're looking forward to continuing to work on those relationships. But it's where that piece of engagement comes in handy. There's a face behind the Water Hub. It's typically my own, and it goes a long way whenever it comes to gaining that comfort to share data.
And I suppose also, it's also about education and ethical data use, because if you've got a university researcher who might just assume I can use this data, right? Of course I can use this data however I need to use this data, but going through those permissions, going through that process, is that something also you do on the hub? And in terms of a function where researchers can contact groups and say, look, I see that you've got this data set, I see it's not public. Can I talk to you about potentially using that and going through what my research is, and etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the data sets on the Water Hub have kind of like a data set contact. So that information is out there. So if someone
That's in the metadata. That's in the metadata.
Yeah. Part of that metadata. We love that one. And we do actually get a lot of folks kind of reach out to us. And in some cases, some groups have really high turnover and they actually choose for us to be the data set contact. So information comes to us and then we're able to hand it off. But some groups that are really, quite involved or have kind of that set email will be the data set contact, and folks are able to reach out. We also have different licensing on our data as well. So most of our data is shared under the Creative Commons share alike by attribution. Some of it is non-commercial, but offering those options as well to our users has gone a long way in allowing them to kind of choose the terms in which they share their data. But we do aim to work with kind of end users of the data to understand what they're doing with their data, and making sure that we get that information so we can log the impact that our data is having.
Which segues wonderfully into my next question, which is about impact. And one of the things I mentioned that really good YouTube video I watched, or that video on YouTube I watched, which was that, I think, four of your water monitors talking about the work they do and the particular focus they have. And one of them basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, the vital role of these activities was to make the invisible visible, which I thought was a really great way of putting the work and what you're doing. And I suppose, collecting data that fills in gaps, contributes to a more holistic picture of what might be going on, etc. Can you talk a bit more about the impact aspect and how you measure that impact aspect in the hub?
Yeah, measuring that impact is always kind of one of the constant struggles. Obviously, it's our hope that people reach out and let us know whenever they use our data, but it's not always the case. But I agree that that idea of making the invisible visible is really quite important. You can look at a stream all day long and you might be able to tell if there's some fluctuation in water level, but what's happening with the temperature, what's kind of going on beneath the surface. So we do have ways to track how our data is being used. We've seen a lot of use cases now. And for us, it goes back to engagement. It's talking with our provincial governments and water offices. It's talking to municipalities and making sure that A, they know that the water hub's there as a resource, but also B, are you using it? If you are, what are some of the ways that you are using it? And we've been really lucky now that we've seen our data integrated into many different reports at this point in time. And data that has been used, for example, by water authorization teams to understand if new licenses can be acquired on certain water bodies and things like that. So we're working to measure it better, but yeah, sometimes it's a little bit of sifting around. We've chatted with the Pacific Salmon Foundation, who have recently used our repository to inform a water temperature model and salmon habitat model that they're working on. We've obviously chatted with Claire Herbert at CKAN. She has integrated all of our data sets into her own database as well. And at this point, I'm just kind of rattling off some of those examples that we've seen, but our groundwater level data has been used to inform certain municipal reports about groundwater availability and drinking water and things like that. So they're definitely out there. Sometimes we got to root around and find them, but we're seeing a lot of really good use cases, especially from decision makers. And that track can be really difficult sometimes in understanding, did our data lead to a certain decision? And
of course, well, that's hard for everyone, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But knowing that it's being used, I think, is a really good first step.
As to whether it actually informed an endpoint or something, well, that's
that's pretty there.
Yeah, that's very complex. Or you could. Does CKAN provide you with any tools to help you measure impact, usage, impact, where the data's going, etc.?
With CKAN.
Or any other technologies, I should say, that are, any pieces of software that are in the hub, not just CKAN.
Yeah, we currently have, we're registered with DataCite Canada, so all of our data has a digital object identifier, which has been really helpful. So whenever we're cited, we are typically notified of that type of thing. So that's been a really helpful tool for tracking usage. That's kind of the big one that I see. A dream of mine is to eventually kind of be able to log, how many downloads or who's downloading or that type of thing. But we currently don't have any of that enabled. So our digital object identifiers are one of the big things that we see for reuse right now.
Okay. I suppose the other thing that linked to that, what I wanted to ask you about is, so I talked with Claire about this when I interviewed her, and I talked with a number of data portal managers about this. And because it's been very much about building these portals, getting the data on there, making the data high quality, making the data accessible and shareable, but in some respects, it's not complete. What's the next step now is you've got all this data on your portal and how you try and move it out more, much more proactively move it out more. And Claire Herbert was talking in the interview I did with her about, the creation of knowledge products, the creation of trying to put together things that we're being much more proactive about community education or getting the data into the hands of politicians. Is that something you've thought about or you do? And on top of the other huge number of things that you do, I mean.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we think about a lot. So much of our data, I think the largest portion of our data especially is tabular data, which means very little to most folks. And our decision makers aren't data analysts by any means, right? So what we have done is, I mentioned it a little bit before, we set up meetings with kind of different government officials. We try to make sure that as many people as possible know about the resources. Don't just talk to the officials, we talk to their staff as well, making sure that kind of across the board folks know that the Water Hub is here is one of the few things we've done. We've done workshops with our municipal governments. But something that we have started to do a little bit more is we've started to work with academic institutions and utilizing the power that is students a little bit more. So a couple of years ago, we did a
love the student placements. Love the student
placements. The students, they have all the power. They're an untapped resource.
Yes.
So we worked with Niagara College a couple of years ago, and we did kind of a joint assignment. So they used the Water Hub to work on data visualizations assignment. And that was a really great way to get data from our contributors used, get some new insights, and process that data in a way that was more accessible to the average user. So we got some really cool products out of that. Another thing that we've started to do in-house is called our Watershed Bulletins. So this is a project where we have taken our monitoring data and have transformed it using the idea of storytelling. So we will do, for example, we've done one on groundwater data, we've done one on hydrometric data, using the data that's in the Water Hub and creating stories around that data and the analysis that was done. So this has been a really great way to get a new diverse audience's eyes kind of on the data that's already been interpreted for them. But yeah, it's something that we think about a lot, and we want to make sure that people are getting the most out of the data. We have 500 data sets almost now in the Water Hub and so many more resources, and we want to make sure that they're all kind of getting their time to shine. So thinking about how to process that data and bring it to light is a big piece of what we do.
Every data set gets its 15 minutes, yeah? Yeah, all right. What about future plans? Any future plans you've got in terms of, and again, you've spoken about some of these during the conversation, but I'm just curious, anything else you can share on this area?
Yeah, I think in terms of future plans, something that we have kind of dipped our toes into is actually helping other communities use our model of a database as a solution for themselves. So as I mentioned, we actually have data from outside the Columbia Basin on the Water Hub because there isn't really an appropriate home for it elsewhere. So we've been chatting with other watershed groups and other, coalitions of communities that might find benefit in having something similar to the Water Hub and helping facilitate those types of builds, which has been really exciting. We've actually have completed one for the Nicola Watershed Governance Partnership, which was a great project. That's kind of one of the big things that we've been working on. And then whenever it comes to improving interoperability amongst databases, I always say that the database landscape is vast. In BC, there's a lot of different options, and I kind of view them all as little separate nodes. And I think one of the things that I want to see is a way to connect all those little nodes so that data isn't as fragmented as it sometimes can be. So interoperability with CKAN has been a really great example of that. We've also been working with DataStream, which is a database that collects mostly water quality data across different watersheds in Canada. We've now got some interoperability set up with their platform and things like that. So those are the things that are front of our mind, as well as new ways to visualize the data and offer some tools to our users so that they're able to get the most out of the information that they're collecting.
And again, you've touched on my next question, which is, and I've been asking this of all in these interviews that I've been doing, What would you recommend to those who want to start their journey in managing a data portal? I mean, what are tips or best practice? And I mean, what do you say to these other groups that are using the hub as a template or a model for what they might want to do?
Yeah, I think the one piece of advice that I would give is that, one, find your niche. So for us, coming into the Columbia Basin Water Hub, we knew that there was a gap that we needed to fill. We understood what that gap was really well. We understood what our users needed really well, from just, the process of engaging with them, talking with them, knowing, where their struggles are, what their barriers are. But even more so, always kind of keeping that listening ear open. So even, we're 4 years into this, and I would say we are constantly accepting feedback, and we're always ready to adjust and change for our user groups. I think would be one of the big pieces of advice to take on, because without our users, without our contributors, we wouldn't have much to show for. So we want to make sure that we're fulfilling our role to the best that we can.
Anything else?
No, I think that kind of covers it. Thank you so much. This was a really great chance to chat about the Water Hub and what we do here. And I could talk Water Hub all day. So I was really happy to have an ear for a full hour there.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much too. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.